historia de los afectos, en este caso la soberbia. Este coloquio tiene, como acaba de mencionar, su 7ª edición, después de que hemos hecho con todos los pecados capitales, de los cuales, además del coloquio, se ha producido una serie de ensayos sobre cine y filosofía en libros que ya están publicados, 5 de ellos, y que estarán próximos a salir, los últimos que están haciéndose, especialmente el de Envidia, y posteriormente el año que entra Soberbia. En esta ocasión estamos haciendo este coloquio a través de streaming desde TVUNAM, debido a, como muchos de ustedes saben, a la situación que está viviendo la universidad, en donde particularmente la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras, donde debería desarrollarse este coloquio, está cerrada. Entonces, bueno, nos dirigimos a todos ustedes a través de este medio, porque tenemos invitados internacionales y queremos aprovechar que ya que tienen su presencia aquí en México, en la UNAM, pues puedan presentar su ponencia. En esta ocasión tengo el gusto de tener a un invitado habitual a estos coloquios, el doctor Paul Majkut, habitual, constante en estos coloquios. El doctor Majkut es de la Universidad de National University, especialmente él está radicado en San Diego. Los campos de estudio originales del doctor Majkut son la poesía inglesa renacentista, especialmente Spenser y Shakespeare, en general la literatura, y tiene un posgrado en filosofía. Ha trabajado su doctorado, especialmente está centrado en la literatura utópica y la prosodia. En la actualidad alterna su enseñanza año con año con los cursos de posgrado sobre Shakespeare, Chaucer, la poesía inglesa del siglo XVII, la literatura utópica, Walt Whitman, la metaficción, y en el cine habla de Billy Wilder, neorrealismo italiano, cine de Europa Central, y actualmente, bueno, él es presidente y fundador de la Sociedad de Fenomenología y Media, y ha publicado extensos artículos sobre las áreas de estudio que él tiene, que son los medios, el cine, la filosofía y la literatura. Es un especialista en estas áreas. Su ponencia se titula Vanity Made of Mirrors, Silicon Kings Made of Glass. Los dejo con el doctor Paul Majkut. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation to once again return to UNAM, this great, magnificent university, just south of our border in San Diego. And thanks to Armando and Leticia and all the others who have made this possible in a series of wonderful conferences that are dealing, as you know, with 7 deadly sins connected to film. And we've had some really great conferences before on greed and lust, and now we get to return to pride. I am going to be speaking in English, so therefore I will speak somewhat slower than I would in San Diego. You know, they say that someone who speaks 2 languages is bilingual, and someone who speaks 3 languages is trilingual, and someone who speaks 1 language is a gringo. But you would think, because I'm married to a woman from Chile, that I would speak Spanish, because we've been married a long time. That's why I don't speak Spanish. So today I want to give a brief account of 2 films, 2 recent films, that deal directly and indirectly with pride. But to do that, I was very lucky to have 2 speakers yesterday, Pachi and Vicente, who gave opposing views of not opposing, but why use one very particular and a very close reading of Vicente of a documentary, and one very philosophical macro understanding. And my talk fits somewhere between that. So you will hear a long, tedious prologue of half the talk before I get to the films, putting a kind of context. So the title here is The Vanity Made of Mirrors, The Silicon Kings Made of Glass. So I'm talking about two films dealing with Silicon Valley and the pride of the CEOs, the chiefs of those companies, their founders, two men in particular, who were very much in the news yesterday and in the last year. And fortunately, making the point I'll be making in this paper for the last few years. So with that, you know, I'm playing with the word glass and silicon and mirrors, but I think they're good metaphors for what I'll be talking about. So, vanity made of mirrors, silicon kings made of glass. I'll give you the abstract here, the general idea of what I'm doing, and explain the picture. So the abstract is the pride or hubris. And yesterday we had as you may remember, those of you who are watching this by video streaming, you remember that there was a discussion period of if hubris and pride were identical. I did check all of my notes last night, and so I'm going to take Pachi's side that in fact pride did exist among the Greeks initially, but also pride is a concept not distinct from hubris, or partially distinct from hubris, that explains the character of pride or hubris or superbia through the generations. So pride, hubris, precedes the fall in classical tragedy and is evident today in stories. Here it comes. Now, I'm going to use the word that's used in the films. I am not a vulgar man. So this is the word. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't drink. I don't have sex. So I'm very pure, but I'm going to use a vulgar term that comes from the films. And the term is asshole. And I'm not sure, but in Tijuana and San Diego, where I come from, it's a border city. So if I use Spanish words, they may be pocho or kind of street language, and I apologize. But I think the word we want is pendejo. Maybe that's the closest word. So this paper really is going to be on assholes. And try to connect it to the films and how these films, though not great films, do provide us with an insight into pendejos that we don't have. I mean, there are pendejos everywhere. When I walk down the street, how many times do I see pendejos? Conferences, I see pendejos. I see pendejos everywhere. And it's amazing. I open up my front door and there's a man knocking on my door and there's a pendejo. So, we're going to use this vulgar term, but it's not mine. I would rarely say asshole. So, who am I talking about? I'm talking about films about Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm also talking about Elon Musk and Tesla. But we're going to leave him out mostly. He can be covered at another time. And many others. And if pride comes before the fall, then pride must fall. We ask, why are men proud? Aristotle gives us an answer in rhetoric, and he says, as for the pleasure in hubris, pride, its cause is this. Men think that by ill-treating others, they make their own superiority greater. So if I say something bad about you, I make myself even better. Young men, he says, Aristotle says, and the rich are hubristic because they think they're better than other people. Young, rich, a dangerous combination. Capitalist pride, hubris, derived from wealth and power, arrogance and haughtiness, brings together men of wealth, and it brings them down in numerous contemporary films. There are a lot of films about rich people falling because of their pride. But it doesn't apply so much to the kings of Silicon Valley today. While showing these glass idols, precisely as Aristotle describes men of pride, these films instead expose them as assholes. Their fall will be shown, I guess, in the future, after the fall takes place, because one of them is dead and the other one, Zuckerberg, is now in the process of falling. The role of film as a structured narrative of denouement and closure reflects the unwieldy, crazy nature of everyday socioeconomic life, revealing the power of fiction to condense and make human frailty comprehensible. In the case of Silicon Valley, we'll be looking at the two films, Steve Jobs and The Social Network. Well, these are thieves, algorithmic idiots, Silicon Valley libertarians, assholes. Well, let's begin with some background definition of terms. Some of these terms, these words I use, are explicit in everyday conversation, but many are implicit, or we assume them uncritically without thinking. In a discourse we have about one, heroic titans of industry, and they would be the robber barons that are here, the late 19th and 20th century. There were a number more than that, but this was the Gilded Age, the golden age of capitalism, and these three, I'm making an equivalence to these three. So, but it also talks about the technology itself. I'm not going to talk much about the technology because I have specific views about what is technology or what is its role, how does it work, and so forth. And we begin with the vocabulary of particular words that are thrown about freely in a contest of wills between haves and have-nots. Or better, you could say a class struggle or a class war that finds ordinary working people pitted going against algorithmic idiots. These terms, whether they're explicit or stealth hidden, are weapons, in fact, in a struggle to control the national and international narratives. I think we're seeing that coming today in Mexico and the United States. We're struggling over words and how to classify. How do we even talk about what's happening to the world economically now in the era of globalism? So, some of the terms I use are robber baron. Robber baron, and that's an entrepreneur, a libertarian. John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, these are famous laissez-faire capitalists. They are Aristotle's rich. Silicon Valley, that's a strange place. You know, it's really founded by a horrible racist, the man who invented the transistor before the integrated circuit. We had transistors. I think the younger people don't know about them, but there were little radios and televisions that were run by what were called transistors. And William Shockley, who invented it, is sort of the founder of Silicon Valley. It's like the colonizer of that area of California. An algorithm, well, an algorithm, to reduce it to our philosophical basics, is it's a simplistic either-or syllogism. It's this or that, in a long sequence of codes of this is that, until you're finally confined to a very specific, a very dangerous thing. Smart, this is a term that's used a lot. Smart, smart water, smartphone. If I may just momentarily make a digression. Also something called smart pills. Have any of you had smart pills? You know, it's like a medicine. Because I know that Once I went to a market, an open market, and there was a man selling smart pills. They were in a bottle, and little brown, round pills. But a pill is in Spanish. What's a pill? Yeah, little pills. And I asked him, I said, what happens? He said, take these and you'll be smarter. I said, oh my God, that's what I need. And I bought them, $25. They're expensive. But I bought them, and he said, take one every day. And I took every day, and I went back after 2 weeks, it was finished. I was a little angry because I don't think I was smarter. And I said, oh, I'm not smarter. He said, yeah. He said, you need another bottle. Okay, I bought a second bottle, $25, $25, not pesos, dollars, right? 2 weeks later, didn't work, went back to him. I said, what do I do now? I said, these are awful, they taste awful, they're awful, and I'm not getting smarter. You know, I said, in fact, they look like rabbit poop. What's a rabbit? They look like rabbit poo-poo. And he said, see, now you're getting smart. So we can apply that same analogy to technology. We can say the same thing about technology. The word smart is a word to be very careful about. It's sometimes applied to intelligence. And there I have a big problem, because I'm not sure that smart and intelligent mean the same thing. And I definitely don't think that intelligent is related to an IQ test, a test to give you a number. I don't accept that. Empathy, well, like empathy, or like truth, empathy exists only for me, only in social intimacy. It can only exist when we're together. It can't exist in a book. It can only exist like at this very moment. We could try it. You could have something like literary empathy, but I don't know if that's empathy at all. Anyway, pride is a profound and deadly ignorance, hubris. And Oedipus' crime, as was mentioned yesterday, is really not that he's marrying his mother or killing his father. It's that he's too arrogant to acknowledge the truth. And he tries to impose that on other people. It doesn't work. I use the term social and anti-social media because I'm a follower of Sherry Turkle, who says we should never use the word social media. You should always say anti-social media because it disrupts sociality. It does not increase it, it decreases it. Sherry Turkle is, for me, one of the most profound of modern thinkers. I won't call her a philosopher because when you say a philosopher, you get into some particular bag. She's a thinker. An asshole, well, you have your own idea of what an asshole is. I know you haven't met any here, but we have a lot of them in the States, all the way from San Diego to, say, Washington, D.C. So, as Nixon was a tragic figure, Trump is not a tragic figure. You know, Karl Marx said, the history repeats itself. It's a very famous line. The first time it's a tragedy, but the second time it's a farce. It's like a comedy. Mm-hmm. And Trump is better not thought of as a tragic figure, because you could think of him as the captain of the ship of fools in the Middle Ages. That makes sense to me. Of the seven deadly, so self-image. Now I'm going to go away from what we were saying yesterday when we were looking at mythology as offering us an image for pride. Of the seven deadly sins, pride is considered the queen. I don't know why it's the queen. Always it's the king who has the problem, but we call the sin the queen. Okay. In the medieval scene, though apparently this female sin affected only men. Kings such as Oedipus, Macbeth, King Lear are well-known literary examples. The question becomes, which of the seven deadly medieval sins is also the original sin, the first sin committed in the Garden of Eden? And as I said yesterday, the argument was made in the Middle Ages that gluttony is the sin, because Adam's sin was that he had to eat the apple, and so it was gluttony. And we please do not associate gluttony with being fat, because the imagery of gluttony is always of a thin person. something we didn't talk about yesterday is that all of this exists in intentions. It's all intentional. If you're talking in the early Greek church fathers, religious fathers, all the way through the Middle Ages. So if you don't have the intention and you do something horrible, there's no sin. You have to have it here. And that's a key element is intentionality in defining what we mean by pride or hubris. So, and the words keep changing, so we have to be really careful. That's why I want to talk about the terms we're using. The word in English could be vainglory. Vainglory, it kind of means pride. Hubris kind of means pride. All of these words are sort of the same. They're partially the same, but they're a little different. And so vainglory is really bodily pride, associated often with actors and actresses. It's a pride in the body. In Renaissance, Middle Ages, there's a character, Rubio, who he's a giant. He's not a very nice guy, but he's proud of his body. So it's all bodily pride. We have a lot of that in San Diego, by the way. You go to Southern California and go to the beaches, you'll see nothing but blondes, rubias. But there aren't very many blondes. But there's this concept of beauty. And so it's the glorification of the body and what you need to do to make it pretty. But instead of thinking of Adam, why don't we think of the original sin as one of self-imagery? The picture we have of ourselves. And this leads us to a consideration of pride or vainglory as self-imagery. And our character then is not Adam, but Narcissus, and looking at himself. So we draw from the mythology a parallel story to what Aristotle talks about in drama in very formal terms. But we draw from mythology this character Narcissus, who, he's looking at himself in a very clear water, because this water comes from Mount Olympus. So it's very clean water, and he sees himself. I think you know the story, and that's it. He can't see anything else, because the entire world in modern psychology, narcissism is the base of everything. Narcissism is the deepest disorder. You're unable to see the world as something other than yourself. Everything is you. And it's fantastic. It's great. We can say it's in a pond of water, the reflection in the water, or we can say this obsession is also in a glass mirror, silicon glass mirror, who is the most beautiful of them all. Or we can even see them in this mad insanity of selfies, and the taking of pictures of yourself. And I'm sure you've been online, and there are people who are taking a picture of themselves every day. It's been 3 or 4 years, and so you can see that person taking a picture of themselves in many different clothes and moods every day, a record of their self, as though the self could be found externally in a selfie, an image, in a water reflection, in a mirror, as though you could find yourself in that. There's a problem with that. The question becomes, was it possible for Narcissus, for humans, to follow Socrates' advice, know thyself? Can you know yourself by looking at your image? I have great problems with that, because I think, what about all my ancestors, your ancestors, the people before there were selfies, before they saw themselves in water? We used to call them cavemen, the people who lived with the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs, way back. If they didn't see themselves, did they exist? If the only way we can know ourselves is in reflection, and that's possible, then they weren't really human. But that doesn't make sense, because in evolution, we come from them. So it's just a problem I have. Knowing yourself is personal identity only possible in reflection, whether in water, glass, or selfie. And I would merely point out that this first philosopher, Thales, he's very famous because, you know, he had his head in the clouds. And the story is, just a story, he's walking and he falls into a dirty water because he's not watching where he's stepping. I think that can be generally true for theorists and philosophers in general, that with your head in the clouds. And there's so much about that, the Greek play Clouds, or the English satirist Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travels. There are philosophers who live in a cloud. And of course that has nothing to do with the iCloud. No, it's not the same at all. But some people prefer to have their heads in the cloud. Okay, so so be careful though, because you can fall in some really dirty water. All the water that gives you reflection does not come from Mount Olympus. Even more prologue. I haven't come to the films yet, but I'm coming as fast as I can. My background, these are the four thinkers. Gosh, that fourth one looks familiar. But the three thinkers that I really depend on are Sherry Turkle, in which she says, you know, the new mediated life has gotten us into trouble. Face-to-face communication is the most human and humanizing thing we do. Fully present in one another, not interrupted by cell phone communications, bing, 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 but fully 100% present with another person face-to-face. It's the most human thing we do. Fully present to one another, we learn to listen. It's where we develop the capacity for empathy. And it's in a fine book of hers called Reclaiming Conversation. And then I also follow Thomas Piketty, who wrote the book in economics on capitalism in the 20th century. Actually, it goes back further than that. And that's a more general context that I put it in. And it's a Marxist. He's not a neo-Marxist, but it's a Marxist interpretation. And then more recently, Kathy O'Neill, who talks about algorithms and what they've actually done in practice. Forget the theory right now, but in practice, that they've criminalized poverty. It's a crime to be poor. And we believe that our algorithms are not prejudiced. They're not in favor of you or me. They're scientific. Well, she's showing that they're not. And that geography, for example, is a substitute or proxy for race. In other words, these algorithms can lead directly to a racist society, and have. That's her claim. She, by the way, is a mathematician, has a PhD from University of California, Berkeley, and she has an mathematical analysis of algorithms and how they're used. So these are warnings about algorithms, what I've come to call algorithmic idiots, because these are the people who think that all can be reduced. They're also called quantifiers, or quants, that we can reduce all of these relationships, even of that of pride, to numbers. Okay, even more background. We're not there yet. Often, theorists judge narrative success in a film, drama, or novel by the ability of a reader or viewer to identify with the story's characters. Transferal of self-identity to a fictional character is a reflective identity, an experience in which subjective identity is found outside of the reader, outside of the viewer. This experience is seen in two very different ways. First, the viewer projects and imposes an already established personal identity or a subjectivity onto a character, or the viewer is a reflection of that character. Both identifications are connected to images of the self. I see myself in that character, or that character is just like me. Underlying these identifications, as radically different as they are, is a common feature. They both lack empathy. Or you could say that they exhibit what we'll call literary empathy, to make a big distinction. Can literary empathy know hunger, for example, as if, how can you really be empathetic if you don't have your hands, with calluses hard from working? Well, if you're a philosopher, of course, you can employ a literary empathy and say it's as if I had. It's as if I were hungry. But I don't think that this could be the same. Somehow that doesn't seem, can a viewer genuinely experience the hunger of the father in Gabagon's moral allegory, Macario, from 1960, in the golden age of Mexican cinema? Remember, I don't know if you remember that story, but there's the, can you actually empathize and feel hunger? Or is it this literary thing called as if? Well, it's like I'm hungry, but this is a wonderful moral allegory, black and white, about the nature of hunger. So how do we relate to the, we're coming to it. How do we relate to the films, Steve Jobs and The Social Network, to the world they represent? We don't. It is not the characters in the films that interest us, although the importance of historical accuracy is not to be underlooked or overlooked. We remind ourselves that history as narrative is never fully accurate. The logical mechanisms of validity are unconcerned about truth, and narratives serve falsehood as well as truth. Validity is not truth. Clearly, for example, all men are truthful. Donald Trump is a man, therefore Donald Trump is truthful. Well, that's very valid. That's valid. Logically, that's valid. Is it true? Well, I don't think so. We can extend Kathy O'Neill's sense of weaponized, because she says that what we're doing is weaponizing algorithms, but we can weaponize many things. We can weaponize speech, we can weaponize symbols, we can weaponize gestures. It's possible to use it in our favor. So to weaponize in a war of words, and that is, again, to repeat, a struggle for the control of the international narrative. We're fighting right now. There's a struggle between who is going to explain it best. And so we begin with this narrative of what the world is. Yeah. Smart. And then you're sort of trapped in a box of thinking that way. History finds its meaning as a category of evolution, I believe, dealing with specific processes and changes. And narrative is only one feature in the survival of the fittest. If we allow for poetic license as a narrative prerogative, something we can do, and within limits, then our two films, Steve Jobs and The Social Network, are seen as weapons. Here, we could go into really a long discussion of ideology and how propaganda brings an audience into existence. We go into Louis Althusser's well-known theory of interpolation, where well, actually you don't really exist, but you're called into existence by someone. But we're not going to talk about that here either. The struggle for narrative control, well, historical accuracy, the capitalist hero, the entrepreneur, you see right here, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, and he's just one of our many examples of an asshole. But the very act of naming is crucial in the struggle for narrative control. That is, for shaping the universe of discourse. Names are specific arrows in our weaponized battle for narrative control. In our case, asshole is a weaponized name for Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Social and political reactions to Silicon assholes, abuse of users, I think we saw that this morning. I think I can directly say that Steve Jobs, although he's dead, screwed me. It changed all of our lives for about a half an hour. Like he came back from the dead and screwed around with us. So pretty powerful, this struggle for control. Because Apple's the best machine they ever made. Just thank God. Thank God I'm smart. God, I got it in my hands. I know. So the naming is a kind of weapon, a particular arrow in our weaponized struggle for control of the narrative. And the two films we have find their arrows aimed at these two. And I'll see if I can play this now. I have to use an apple? Oh my God. So I just want to take one little piece of this film. Now we'll start it from there.
I'm coming back for everything.
You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be.
Aren't we lucky? We may not be assholes yet, but if we try really hard, we can become assholes. So the future is guaranteed for it. It just takes a little work. And that's the key line that his, not a girlfriend, but the girl says to him, because he is an asshole. She says, you know, the problem, it isn't even that you're an asshole. It's that you're a failure. You want to be an asshole. You're trying really hard to be an asshole, and you're not even good at that. The screenwriter for both this film and the film on Steve Jobs is the same. So you can see that this is one of our soldiers in this battle for narrative control, because he uses the same sort of description in, come on. Not moving. Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs, same idea. Let's listen to this. So we heard the first film, not my word, assholes in the film. And now we're going to see a confrontation between the two founders of Apple, the two men, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And I think, where am I going? 350. Can I get there? Let's try that. So this is their confrontation where Wozniak is saying you can be more human, and Jobs is obsessed with his vision of the world, his vision of his narcissistic vision of the world that you will live in. Remember, it's not just that it's his world, it's the world that you're going to have to live in. In fact, it might be the world we're living in right now. Monomania. So let's try it.
That I'm letting you keep your job. You get a pass.
You know, people used to ask me what the difference was between me and Steve Jobs. I would say Steve was the big picture guy, and I like the solid workbench. When people ask me what the difference is now, I say Steve's an asshole.
I want to be clear, I'm providing you, and the screenwriter have provided you a weapon. You, in this streaming audience, and at present, I'm providing you, and these films provide you a weapon. So in the future, when you say, they'll say, Steve Jobs, you know who he is? You can say, oh yeah, he's the big one. So very clear. Here we go again. So, the nerd, the quant, the asshole. Today, pride is conflated with egotistical vanity and mired, stuck, confused in cultural phenomena such as film, speech, and ostentatious displays of wealth. Contemporary libertarianism, what you in Mexico call neoliberalism, but in the States we would call it libertarianism, same thing, defines itself as rational egoism, excuse me. In our films, the nerd's pride causes him to desire to be cool or hip, as well as wealthy. But it cannot be because he's a quant, and coolness does not exist in the world of numbers. The word pride is today not solely a bad word, it is not considered a sin necessarily. As often as not, pride is a good term, as in black pride, gay pride, but these are uses associated with who I am, not what I do in the ethical sense. Still, the original sense of medieval pride as a deadly sin or modern psychological disorder of character also remains. In both Steve Jobs and The Social Network, we are struck by Zuckerberg's and Jobs' overweening pride. And this is the kind of pride you find in Achilles and in Greek drama, but you find it all the way through the stages of the early Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, the Renaissance. So although it's changing, what pride is, there's some common element to it. Their arrogance readily brings Narcissus as well as Aristotle to mind and reveals the psychological imbalance of narcissism at the core of the characters. A narcissist is unable to see the world as anything other than him or herself. The world is his creation, an extension of himself. Narcissism is not merely an egotistical state of mind, but egotism elevated to monomaniacal insanity. For the vainglorious Narcissus, there is no empathy because he's alone. There's only, unless you can empathize with yourself, but since he's the only one in the world, and all the world is his world, there's really no need for empathy because the self-love has already made it unnecessary. The world is his creation. So the mythological image of pride and its fall are no less biblical. Lucifer falls, and that's part of our general understanding of pride today. That's one way. But it's also Greek, and it's deeply embedded in this human narrative, no matter where we find it, or by what name we find it. So then we have questions of structured reality, and I'm going to make this very short, but these conferences have provided us a way of seeing the sins as a way of interpreting our contemporary life today. Yeah, are there really 7 sins? Well, no, in fact, there are 8, but that got changed too. Are they deadly? Are they going to send you to hell? Well, maybe they will, but I don't think so. And are they even a sin? You know, the deadly sins don't start out as sins. They start out as temptations, and they're only intended for monks. What is it in Spanish, a monk? A religious man that lives separated in a house, like Simon. So originally, this is only for monks. The 7 sins weren't intended, they're not for you. This is how monks should be worried about temptation. Like, I'm hungry, I need to eat. No, because if you're hungry, you don't think about God. So later they change into sins because in the Catholic religion, there are sacraments, and one of the sacraments is penance, confession. When the priest hears you and you say, Father, I did something really bad, tell me, okay. So you know that, you probably know that. But when that happened, the Pope realized that priests were stupid. Priests didn't know what a sin was. So the sins are actually a book that was written by Gregory the Great, Pope Gregory the Great, and it's a list of what the priest should ask the people in penance is a sin. Because the priest didn't know, but the people were coming and said, Father, I sinned. And so, I don't know, what is the sin? So this puts it in an order. Many questions come up now from these 2 films. Many very deep philosophical questions, and why we owe so much to this conference that Armando and Leticia put on is that it brings these questions that are hidden, it brings them to the surface through a popular medium, through film. So with my students, for example, I can actually talk about these deep questions, philosophical questions, but introduced through a popular medium that makes it something that we can grasp. That was, here's one question, very quickly, and I'm about to finish. Is pride the root of all human fault or sin and the cause of the other 6 deadly sins? Maybe not. It has rivals. Greed, in the Middle Ages, greed was the root, the raiz of all sins, not pride. And then you get the modern capitalist problem of two sins fighting each other, because the sins are always shown in the Middle Ages as a parade, an order of people, if you want the representation of the sins, or sometimes it's a tree. And then there's the bottom part, the root. What is the root sin? What's the foundation sin? Or a parade. But in the parade, you have the sins in an order of power. And so pride is the queen, and the others are pulling her. But two of them are fighting. Sloth, which you call laziness, which originally, it's a combination of 8 sins. It became one sin, so really it's apathy, or laziness, sloth, or apathy. But it's also, it just do nothingness, a bad state. And greed and laziness, sloth, are fighting. Who will go first? If you talk to a capitalist, he will say, the workers are lazy. Their sin is that sloth, it's laziness. That's the sin, that's the problem of our age, the lazy workers. If you talk to workers, they will usually say, no, greed. It's greed is the problem, not laziness. I'm not lazy. They use other words. So capitalists today will say productivity. You're not productive enough. You need to increase your productivity. But on the other hand, the worker will say, hey, I'm working. I can't work anymore. I've reached this, I need to survive, and so I'm getting not enough money to survive, or just enough. So the context of the sins and the capitalist order becomes clear again. And so again, this becomes a way, talking about the sins becomes a way of talking about the society today. You might want to know, you might want to think about the last part. Does this structured reality, is it archetypal? There would be those thinkers who think that psychoanalytic thinkers who see this is deep in humans, it's archetypal. So it follows these patterns of winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, birth, youth, old age, death. Morning, noon, dusk, light. And these are the archetypal narrative patterns that it is said to find anywhere. I guess so. But does naming someone an asshole demonize and precede the fall? Is the fall in reality, or are we pushing them? Are assholes archetypal? So finally, last slide, sorry. The class struggle is fought in the world of everyday economics, in the workplace, the home, the market, but also in art. One battlefield in this war is the struggle for narrative control through film. Enemies are identified, visualized, and given names. Films such as Steve Jobs and The Social Network offer a weaponized structure of reality by naming assholes. Thank you.
¿Me ayudarías a traducirlo? Me ha parecido una manera... ¿Sí? Me iba a ayudar, sí, pero... me ha parecido un enfoque muy interesante. Por ejemplo, para terminar de aterrizar la reflexión sobre qué significa para nosotros pensar en estas pasiones, en estos movimientos que pueden tener los pecados, ¿no? en el desarrollo de nuestra manera de estructurar simbólicamente nuestra comprensión de la condición humana. Allá a lo mejor hasta podemos prescindir de algunas cargas conceptuales que que los pecados o los vicios tenían en sus propios contextos culturales. En ese sentido está llena de provocaciones la presentación que ha hecho el día de hoy. Ahora, citando eso, también los matices resultan útiles para tomar esos riesgos. Entonces, la cuestión, por ejemplo, de utilizar un vocabulario más completo, donde soberbia puede significar lo mismo la vanagloria, puede significar el orgullo, y en lugar de buscar cómo forzar la sinonimia, por el contrario, es extender lo más que se pueda el contraste entre la singularidad entre un concepto y el otro. Entonces, particularmente cuando tenemos como este elemento tecnológico en el desarrollo de nuestras formas culturales ya tan profundamente arraigados, parece muy útil para poder identificar las pequeñas variantes en el desenvolvimiento económico-político, en su juego económico-político, por ejemplo, para pensar cómo es que por una parte se activan dispositivos de control y por otro lado se activan formas de resistencia. Entonces, el juego de la construcción de valores sobre el modo en que se expresan estas pasiones, por ejemplo, la gula, que pudiera constituir un horizonte de placeres, pero atacados por un sistema moral o un sistema que está politizado de la moral, entonces lo puedo condenar, entonces lo puedo normalizar, lo puedo regular. Desde la perspectiva que has presentado, esto está lleno de posibilidades de cómo utilizarlo para distintos tipos de análisis y bueno, lo felicito. Muchas gracias.
There's a lot here. Let's see if I can order this. I'm not sure that we can reduce the 7 sins, 8, however, to cultural only. I leave room for a kind of universality, the possibility of universal that's built into human biological nature, so that acts of pride are evolutionary, behavioral evolution, and changing, of course. That we find the meaning of pride changing through the centuries, well, that means it's alive. It's things that are ideas and animals that are alive change. It's not a dead category, in other words. Now, and so it changes through these cultural signifiers, but something remains the same. This is a discussion we were having yesterday, and it became like, the way that it became discussed became hard, like there was this or that. But in fact, it's an evolution. And so it's not that it doesn't have a certain meaning or not. Now, how does pride connect to today's economic situation? Which I too find very interesting. And how to use these sins to look at the contemporary view, because if I'm in the contemporary view, I can't see it. I can't see it. Your point is really interesting, and I too am really interested in how this connects, particularly to what you call neoliberalism. I call libertarianism, but we don't use the term as much in Europe and the United States, but South America uses neoliberalism a lot. But it's the same thing. And I tried to find its history, and I find it in early, there's in the United States, there are the Antifa, the anti-fascist movement, which is a very dignified, it's not a party, by the way, and it's a very good group of people that go back to the Weimar Republic in Germany. Antifa, the anti-fascists, were around early. Thankfully, they lost. But I trace it to a kind of economics. The economics that now, if you're following the news, the IMF, E-M-A-F-A, what is it called? IMF, International Monetary Fund. They're the big international bank who give money to countries, loans. I'll say, we have money for you. We want money, we have money. Please take it. Yeah. You see the situation in Argentina right now. The IMF, maybe we get money. The other side of that picture is that this is very dangerous, because the second step in this sin of greed is we give you the money, but you have to change the way you live. So, no, you can't have free medicine. No. Free education. Unam's got to go. This is too expensive. I mean, come on. Well, this comes, in the United States, we say that neoliberalism is the door to fascism. And in the 1930s, the fascist government of Austria, and it was openly fascist. They used the term. It's not hidden. The Dollfuss government was fascist. They were happy to be followers of Mussolini. But the libertarians of the Austrian School of Economics, which becomes the Chicago School of Economics, which becomes, in Chile, Pinochet imposed that. And in Eastern Europe, they did the same thing. So we have to be, what you're really asking me is a very broad and deep question. I think it's a very profound question. And I don't, what do you think? I mean, would you answer your own question, and then I'm going to try, because it's deep water. So you were talking about how these sins can relate to something contemporary, and I think you were speaking solely in cultural terms, only in terms of culture, or?
No, no, qué pensar. El tema donde yo lo centraría es en este de cómo la organización algorítmica de cierta estructuración simbólica permite plantear un dispositivo de inclusión y de exclusión simultáneamente, en donde por un lado está desplegándose globalmente, al mismo tiempo que del otro lado está definiendo identidades locales, ¿no? En donde el mecanismo, más que denominar un pecado en particular como la soberbia, hay que explicar la manera en que se comunica en el sistema completo de los pecados, porque en ese sentido ser raíz, ¿no?, es que logra ser también la avaricia, por ejemplo, que solo se despliega si es avaricia, o que solo se despliega si es una avaricia codiciosa hecha gula, ¿no? O sea, así yo lo plantearía, y más bien lo quería dejar abierto, no era que realmente lo estuviera cuestionando.
You know, in one way, there's really only one sin. So we can go back to Aristotle, and he says, you know, all of the sins, he does list particular things, he has a list, but ultimately, all of these sins are just one thing when you go too far this way or too far this way. And so he says you need harmony, you need to take the middle path. So for gula, for gluttony, not me of course, for gluttony, the idea is don't not eat, you should eat in moderation. Moderation is a lot more difficult than eating like a pig, that I do, or not eating like Simon of the Desert. I go between those two. And I know in nutrition science, they say don't do that. In the United States, they call it ballooning. Like a balloon. So you go up and you go down, and you go He said some real bad things to you.
Del rebote,
You
¿no?
should
El rebote.
eat regularly. And don't be, I don't eat, I don't do this, or don't be, like a pig. So I think you're getting at that too. Can the system, how do we take one of the sins? And all of the sins can be the root. I can make an argument for anger. Anger is the root of all sins. In the Middle Ages, Vox malorum est cupiditas from Chaucer. Greed is the root of all evil, period. No question about it. Greed should be the king. So yeah, but do you see how handy, how convenient it is to use the framework of the sins, 7, 8, 6.
Adelante.
Yeah, at one time, sadness was one of the sins. To be sad was a sin. And then that became a problem because people said, well, no, there's a good sadness. Then they say, oh, there's melancholy. So then you get academics, philosophers. Well, there are two kinds of sadness. There's sadness, and there's melancholy, where you reflect. And that's a good thing to have. And so it's like the law, it becomes more and more defined. So I haven't really answered your question, but I'll stop there.
Okay,
Gracias.
thank you very much. Estamos. Gracias. Regresamos al séptimo Coloquio Internacional de Cine y Filosofía, Historia de los Afectos, en donde estábamos viendo el pecado, la soberbia, el último de esta serie de coloquios que hemos llevado en los últimos 7 años, que se han convertido, que también tienen paralelamente una colección de libros. Próximamente aparecerá el libro de Elvira y posteriormente Soberbia. Ahora tengo el gusto de presentarles a una invitada por primera vez a esta serie de coloquios, fifth time in Mexico City, okay, in the University, National University of Mexico. Es Elvira Godek Kiryluk. Ella es doctorante en inglés en la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago y ha trabajado, su investigación precisamente se enfoca en el modernismo americano y ruso, especialmente en las condiciones de inteligibilidad de las políticas y la estética de los proyectos. Su tercera área de especialización es en estética, precisamente ella ha estudiado el idealismo alemán y la escuela de Frankfurt. Ella también está desarrollando su proyecto junto con Majkut en la Sociedad de Fenomenología y Media desde el año 2000. De ella va a hablar de algo que nos es muy cercano al mundo. Va a hablar, a propósito de su área de especialidad, va a hablar de Sigalberto y de los manifiestos del mismo, de este documentalista ruso y el trabajo que hizo, que conocemos muchos a través del hombre con la cámara. Les dejo con... Thank you.
I'm honored to participate in the 7th International Colloquium on Film and Philosophy that focuses this year on pride. And I'd like to thank Professors Leticia Flores and Armando Casas for organizing this colloquium. I will not be speaking about representations on pride on screen, as in cinematographic depictions of character or narratives that map the rise and fall of the Korean pride, but rather about the pride of theory, the kind of pride that is involved in an attempt to give an account for work or action by giving testimony to what one wants to do or how one does it, instead of reflecting about what one actually does or what the work does. The fault of the first approach is that it only conjures what it cannot make actual, and the second is that it delegates to causal processes of technology the work of reason. One striking aspect of the present state of scholarship on Ziga-Vertov is that the recognition he now widely receives for the mastery of his craft seems to have been made possible precisely by his failure to successfully execute the propaganda that he intended to carry out. Critics are reassured by this failure because no one hurries to praise the technologies of the Stalinist regime, but the result is that the scholarship on Vertov focuses on the repertoire of his innovations, but rarely assesses the success of his work on its own terms. This presentation attempts an analysis of Vertov's cinematography that attempts to disentangle his achievements from the hubris of the manifesto and the hubris conditioning the reception of his works. So, right from the beginning, the title that I gave my presentation, or rather the subtitle, Ziga-Vertov, How to Do Things with Manifestos and How to Do Them with Camera, points to a kind of tension between the manifesto, the declared intent, and the work or the deed. No one wants to actually do things by manifesto. Ideally, we want to do things by doing them. But in the case of Ziga-Vertov, I will demonstrate there is this incommensurability. Now, Vertov wrote a number of manifestos, but in several of his films, he produces a manifesto right at the beginning. For example, in the translation of it right here for your convenience, and I'm going to read it. So first, the first screen tells us what it is, that it gives the title, it tells us that it's a film record in 6 reels, and it's a vocal production made in 1929. And also, parenthetically, it explains that it's a fragment from a cameraman's diary. So although it presents the forthcoming work as a fragment, nonetheless, G.K. Vertov already gives us a kind of frame of reference, or a frame for the interpretation of this fragment by suggesting that it's a diary. Okay, so the manifesto calls our attention and says, attention viewers, this film attempts to represent a film transmission of visible phenomena without the help of subtitles, film without subtitles, without the help of a script, film without script, without the help of theater, film without sets, actors, etc. This experimental work aims to establish authentically the absolute international language of cinema on the foundations of its complete separation from the language of theater and literature. Author-director of the experiment, G.K. Vertov. All right, so right away, the one thing that we should notice is that we often give at least lip service to the maxim that a picture is 1,000 words. And I propose that here what we have is something other than that, if not opposite. That the thousands of pictures that we get in the course of the film are preceded by several slides that give us words that make the pictures that follow intelligible. But also, the question that arises is, to what extent would G.K. Vertov actually told us that would follows? In one sense, this particular film, Man with a Movie Camera, is a perfect exponent for G.K. Vertov's theory, because it because it is usually described as being reflexive, in the sense that it presents the work of a cameraman, that it films the cameraman, or that it shows us what the cameraman films. And in being so reflexive, it is deemed to be a good example of a modernist work which is concerned with its own conditions of possibility. However, this, I think, is actually a misunderstanding in some sense of the modernist project. The modernist project arises from a break with representation. So we are no longer in modernist literature and modernist filmmaking and modernist paintings interested in mimetic representation of an outside reality, but we are interested in the inquiry of into the medium of representation with which we engage. In that sense, we're interested in the conditions of possibility that establish the ontological status of that work which we're producing. And we could think of it, for the sake of convenience, as a kind of medium specificity. What makes this work in this medium what it is? And if we think about a modernist project in that sense, then it should become clear fairly quickly that the kind of reflection that is normally taken as a marker of the modernist project in being the diary of a cameraman doesn't actually do anything. The modernist project is interested in sufficient condition. The reflection of a cameraman is not even a necessary condition. You don't have to film a cameraman in order to have film. you can film other narratives, you can film other images. And not only it's not a necessary condition, but it's also not a sufficient condition for reflection. Just because we film a cameraman doesn't mean that reflection necessarily ensues. This is kind of a point that Majkut had made earlier with regard to selfie. Just because I take a picture of a selfie, that does not actually produce the knowledge of myself, even for me. Okay, so here we have in Men with a Movie Camera, a film that is trying to establish itself as a work. Let's look first at how well he, and actually I think that Godek does attempt to to give foundations for his camera work, and I'll get to it in a moment. But let's look first at how well it fulfills the kind of conditions that he announced in his manifesto at the very beginning of the film. Okay, so let's look at this clip. Okay, so in this clip, we have one of the first sequences that establish a visual metaphor between the awakening of the city and the awakening of a person and the opening of eyes. We see that the blinds open of a storefront, and what we have at this written here in Russian on this advertisement is glasses or pensée. So the opening of the blinds represents the opening of an eye, but not of an eye exactly. Not of an eye that sees, but of an instrument for seeing, like glasses. However, what I would like to also point out is that even though he does not use subtitles in his film or overtitles in this particular film, nonetheless, he does use writing, he does use subtitles, it's just that he makes use of them diegetically, as in this example. The visual metaphor that he establishes does make use of writing, but it's writing that comes from the footage, not that is inserted in post-production. Okay. Of seeing further elaborated. There's a visual metaphor, there's a parallel established between the blinds that open up, the camera that that closes and widens its aperture, and the blinking eyes. However, there are several problems with this metaphor. Let's just take one problem with this metaphor, and that is that the point of a metaphor is that, of course, the things that we put into a relation of equality are never exactly equal. The purpose of the metaphor is an explanation. But in here, we know more or less how blinds operate. We know how eyes work. What we would be, were we the audience of Gigavertov in the early 20th century, what we would be least familiar with would be with how the camera operates. However, the understanding of this particular visual metaphor rests precisely on our understanding of how the camera operates. The camera doesn't explain to us the blinds. The camera doesn't explain to us the eyes. We must already know how the camera works in order to understand the visual metaphor. And the point of the camera is, of course, that it lets in the light that then imprints the image on photoreactive, on film coated with photoreactive solution. So the image is produced by literally being hit by light, by means of by means of an impression. Okay, which is not exactly in parallel with how the eye operates, insofar that, yes, of course, the eye is also a photoreceptor, but we see not just by virtue of our eye receiving stimuli, but also by virtue of understanding what it is that we're seeing. So the lilac is not, the image of the lilac that we see, the point is for us as seers is not just that it comes into focus, but that we recognize it as a lilac, right? And the blinds don't work that way. The blinds, when you shut them, it's not that anything comes into focus, the room just gets darker. If you blink your eyes, the image doesn't, the way that the actress does, the image also doesn't come into focus. You can focus into an image if you keep the eyes closed, right? But not by blinking the way that she does. So the visual metaphor that is here constructed is somewhat forced, as I said, and it is dictated by how the camera works, and it explains nothing except how the camera works. However, it is an important part of the film, because here, not in the reflexive, not in the, as I said before, not in the reflection of the cameraman, but precisely in this sequence that tells us how the camera works, we get to Dziga Vertov's kind of foundation of medium specificity, that it is an impression produced by light on photoactive material. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing that I wanted to point out is that his claim that there are no actors, there's no script in his works, proves not to be exactly true. No one really gets caught off guard blinking this way. I don't know, just in the bathroom, right? It seems pretty clear that the person who blinked on this image was doing this specifically in response to the director's command. This is also not the kind of image that you just find randomly. Randomly, people don't find themselves in their bathroom after their morning routine in front of a camera, right? So again, even though she may not be a trained actress, what she is actually doing in this scene is acting. Furthermore, it's also questionable to say that there's no script. In order to put these images into alignment, there is a work of reason. Somebody put them into alignment in this way in order to elicit from the viewer a certain kind of narrative. Okay. All right, let us watch this sequence first. it easier the point that I was making earlier, and that is that we cannot really take it at face value that this life caught unawares, this kind of morning routine of dressing yourself and washing yourself, etc., is not, with the cameras and large cameras in those days, are not really accidental. It was a performance. And in the case of a woman washing herself, even the fact that, her face wasn't shown, that she didn't face the camera, also indicates a performance. In the last fragment of this particular excerpt, there is another kind of example of life caught unawares, where the person filmed actually notices the camera and gives an authentic reaction to seeing a camera by a kind of embarrassment and by laughing. But although this is, although this is authentic, it is also a behavior that is elicited by the camera, that is in reaction to a camera. So it's not exactly a documentation of life caught unawares either. So that's one point that I wanted to make here. The second point that I wanted to make is that in this particular sequence, what we have is, I didn't get it from the very beginning, just for the sake of time, but what we have interwoven are really two sequences. So on the one hand, we have the cameraman leaving the city, going to his filming location to film the oncoming train, and that is spliced up by shots of the woman washing herself, doing her morning hygiene, dressing herself, etc. So, how are we to understand the juxtaposition of these two narratives? And one way, of course, is the idea of simultaneity that is borrowed from D.W. Griffith, that these are simultaneous events. But if we then understand these as two simultaneous narratives, as two things that are happening at the same time, the cameraman is going to work as the woman is preparing herself for her day, then the question is, in what way what we see the woman do represents the diary of a cameraman? Yes, of course, I know that some cameraman filmed it, and very likely this is the very same cameraman, Mihaly Kaufman, who filmed the train sequence, but nonetheless, diegetically, within the frame of the film, it does not allow itself to be read as a diary, as an imprint of that particular cameraman's daily routine. It's something next to it, it's something parallel to it, it's something simultaneous to it. It's not an impression, it's not represented, it's not constructed as an impression of his constituting his diary. Okay, but what it does give us evidence of is there being a script, right? That these two stories are put into a relation, and that this relation, this order into which they are scripted. There we go. Okay, so we've been talking about bringing these sequences into relation, but of course it's not the cameraman that brings them into a relation. The cameraman films what's in front of him. The particular interwoven montage that I've just seen is the work of the editor, right? It's the work of Spilova, Elizabeth Spilova. So here is an excerpt that represents her at work. elaboration of the film thing, of Zige Werther's film thing, is the camera eye that captures reality by impression. That doesn't actually help us do what he professes that it will help us do, and that is to understand the social reality we live in. The understanding of the social reality that we live in is done not by this process, but by the process of montage, by the process of constructing the order in which we see these images, of cutting the film and putting it not into the order, of cutting the film and presenting the images not in the order of capture, but in the order that produces a response. Okay, so perhaps the better title might have been something like A Woman with a Cutting Board, rather than a man with a movie camera. Okay, but then the question is, but in that case, how do we draw a difference between the kind of work that Zige Werther produces and the kind of work that Sergei Eisenstein produces? For example, in this scene, Krakauer wrote about Eisenstein that, and Krakauer, of course, is a theorist who made the point that film is different than other narrative media because everything in it is determined. So, for example, if we have a literary narrative, and in this literary narrative, we're told that Anna Karenina has a brown hair lock that always escapes her bun. That's kind of like what we know about her. We don't know if you ask, okay, but what color are her nails or what shape are her nails? You don't know that because that was not information that was presented to you. That simply doesn't exist. The only thing that exists in a literary narrative is that what you were explicitly told. That is not the case for film narratives. Film narratives are fully determined precisely because the camera receives an impression of everything that is present in front of it, not only that was explicitly intended, right? In making this point, Krakauer, is not talking about Zige Werther, but he's writing about Eisenstein, and he says, he's trying to reconcile this view with the kind of director that Eisenstein is, a director given to a kind of Wagnerian totality, a director dedicated to a total work. So in this image, what we see is that Eisenstein was so dedicated to a total work that not only we have this image perfectly kind of designed in terms of geometric tensions, but also he waited for the particular time of day in which those shadows cast by the descending Cossack army on the Odessa steppes would be the longest. So he is also a person who a director who in thinking about the visual image is taking account of the impressions produced on film. So, and he's also, of course, a director who does montage, who is in many ways interested in the same kinds of things as Werther. The main difference between them seems to be this question of where the work is being done. For Eisenstein, most of it is done in pre-production, whereas for Werther in post-production. Werther maintains a fealty, a loyalty to this notion of capturing life as it is. But, you know, what is life as it is? I actually have cut out accidentally a slide here. Oh, here it is. Okay, so let us leave this for a second aside. This is the slide that was supposed to come next. Oh. Sorry about that. So the question that I left you with before I showed you the wrong excerpt was, you know, what is life as it is? Because so far, the two, you know, the two examples of life caught as it is that I showed you, and that is of a woman dressing herself, and also of this hobo, I take it, or you know, as a worker sleeping on the train docks, do not exactly meet that definition, because one is clearly acted, and the second one, although it is authentic, it responds to the camera. It does not, with a camera that interferes, that intervenes into the life of that worker. So this sequence of the mother giving birth would be a good example, because you can't really act giving birth. It's the kind of thing that happens, you know, whether you film it or not. The baby got born. The woman gave birth to it. It's the kind of it's the kind of event that has a different relationship to the reality, in the sense that it cannot be acted. Okay. So it has the kind of relationship to reality that in philosophy of Charles Sanders Peirce, I'm not going to go into this, is called indexical in the sense that it stems from the reality. Okay, so then the next sequence that I showed you was another. Okay, so this sequence that I showed you is a skeleton of a Scythian that was found in East Russia at the site of where when the electromagnetic dam was being built, and it's from Scythians are a race of are an Asiatic tribe that was active on the Russian steppes some 400, 500 BC. But in terms of the kind of image that it is here relevant because it's a fossil. So it's an indexical image par excellence, right? It's not a constructed image. It's like the light hitting the photoreactive film. It's made by impression. It's made by it's a fossil. But even this fossil, in a particular narrative that Digavetov constructs with him, doesn't really rely on it being a fossil. The reason why it's here is because at the turn of the century, there was in Russia this belief that Russia will become the fourth Rome, or the next Rome. That Russia, Western civilization is coming to a decline, and it's Russia that will come in and revitalize Europe, that it will become a power like the Scythians. And this political power of the Scythians in the shape of a fossil is connected here to the power of the dam being built that will provide Russia with, with the actual industrial power with electricity. Okay, so again, even though the point is made with a fossil, even though it's made with an impression, it's not made by means of it. It's made by means of juxtaposition of images that already have a social meaning attached to them. Okay, so now, and by the way, those images were taken from Adinatsite from the 11th year. They were not taken, the last ones were not taken from The Man with a Movie Camera. And now I'm going to move to the third and final film in this presentation, and that is 3 songs of Lenin made in 1934, so already in the 30s. And here we have Vietov coming up against the kind of problem that he was able to satisfactorily maneuver or solve in A Man with a Movie Camera by the application of this diary frame. The diary frame of a cameraman that paralleled the diary of the city provided for us an interpretive frame within which we could interpret the images that followed. Even though we still needed the manifesto, even though we still needed diegetically embedded subtitles. But here, the frame is different. The frame is of the songs, but we don't actually hear the songs. Songs are, the meaning of the songs is rendered for us in images, and the point of these images is that that all of these things that we find in life, the visual appearances or the visual phenomena amount to one thing. Lenin. Okay, so I'm going to read to you these several slides because I think that they're probably too small for you to read. Starting with this one, it says, in Europe, in America, in Africa, and beyond the Arctic Circle, people sing songs about Lenin, friend and liberator of the oppressed. These are songs of women who have cast off their veil of electricity that brings light to the villages, of water that makes the desert recede, of the illiterate who have become literate, and of all this and Lenin become one. No one knows the authors, I just read them out of order, I'm so sorry. No one knows the authors of these songs, but the songs are carried from yurta to yurta, from village to village, from settlement to settlement. These are songs of the struggle for a new happy life, and of this being one with Lenin. These are songs of the struggle for a new happy life, and of this being one with Lenin. Okay, so philosophically speaking, I'm not like interested here in political critique, of propaganda. What I'm interested here is in the philosophical problems of making the apparent phenomena, the visible phenomena, equal to Lenin, right? Like how do you do this? Okay, so before I go on, let us watch this final says is in a dark prison was my face. So first song in a dark prison was my face. With the three songs of Lenin, even for the contemporary audience, Lenin was already named when Stalin was in power, and it was a praise of Lenin, so it was somewhat ill-timed. The second problem was, of course, that when you read, when you watch the entire film, then what you get is images of people in the peripheries you know, people of various ethnic identities in the Soviet empire, really, are doing work, producing goods, and sending them to the center, to the, you know, to Moscow, to the center of the imperial power. The problem is that it doesn't really look any different than imperial capitalism. So I'll wrap it up in like 30 seconds. So the problem here is that it's difficult to interpret in a stable manner, but even if you don't take these, even if you don't undertake these concerns, the problem still remains of how do you take something like a bench, right? A bench that was made famous by the photograph that I include here, that doesn't actually appear in the original version of it, of the film. It appears later in the version of the film that Spilova re-edited. How does this bench, on which, this particular bench on which Lenin sat, on which he was photographed, how does that mean the kind of enlightenment sung about by these songs? How does Lenin equal this woman reading, right? Can this be actually produced, but nothing else, but what is specifically specifically particular to the medium of camera, as Vietov defines it by means of indexicality of an imprint. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions?